During this episode, we've been talking about during foster care. Earlier, we heard from Amanda looking at the foster care system and what it means to be a foster parent and working in foster care. But now we're going to turn to the part of during foster care and look at a term called respite. Some of you might not know about respite. Some of you do. To help us explore respite, we are joined by our friends Jack and Nancy Bauman. Jack is a retired school counselor and Nancy is a retired teacher. But they have certainly not retired from sharing the love of God with those they encounter. Nate and I love a lot of things that have nothing to do with foster care, and we love things in foster care. But one of the things we definitely love and agree on together is we love watching people do what they were made to do. You know, when you watch someone do something that they were made to do, it is just a delight because you get a deeper glimpse into the presence of our God. And watching Nancy and Jack interact with people and particularly interact with kids and talk about their interactions with kids is clearly something that's evidence of God's love in them. So I'm excited to share our friends with you today. And I hope that this is a ministry to you as we learn about how to help kids during foster care and foster families in foster care through respite. So thanks for joining us, Jack and Nancy.
Our pleasure.
So thanks. And we're going to just dive right in because a lot of people don't know what respite is. So go ahead, Nate. What do you got?
So our first question is, what is respite? How is it similar to foster care and how is it different?
Okay. You want me to do that one?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't even know what respite was when I first heard the word. And I was talking to a foster parent and just responding to her as how cute her foster baby was. And I said something to the fact that I think if my husband and I were younger, we would have done something like that. And she's the one that said that, you don't have to be a certain age, she said, and you could do respite for somebody that is very much needed. So I asked her what it was, and she described it a little bit more of what our life was like. Mm-hmm. It was like being a grandparent to a foster child or foster children, a family. And there's many foster families that don't have other family support structure near them, like their parents to take the kids and babysit or take them a special place and do something with them, or just kind of be that needed buffer when it might be needed in a family. And I said to her, well, I would love doing something like that. And that was before we even had any little grandchildren around. And I said, but I don't know if my husband's going to be on board with this because he's not the little kid person, to be down on the floor with them and changing diapers and things like that. But I said, I would pray about it and ask him. So we actually prayed right there. She and I did. And I went home and mentioned to him about that there was going to be a informational meeting about what respite was and fostering. And I said, but I know you're probably not going to want to do it. And he said, well, I will go. We'll go and we'll find out about it and decide from there. And so we went through basically the training process, of which there is a training process that is very similar to what the foster parents go through. So we have to go through the same thing. But yeah, does that kind of give you
it does. And so as it tells us kind of the journey in and so respite, right, is one of the big differences is it's generally short term. Yes. And so can you speak to the differences in that way, like how, like in length or
yes.
How you find out about these kids, which is that process is a little different.
Yeah. Why don't you answer that?
Well, it can be a variety of ways. Again, as she said, we're talking about having them primarily on weekends and that. And my ideal when I started into this, and just to piggyback on what she said, when she asked me, I'm thinking I'm 70 years old. I really don't want to go there, but I'll go to the training, and as long as you understand the first time I want to turn back, we can do that. Well, now it's 4 or 5 years later, so we're still
He
we're
didn't turn
still
back.
there, and we're doing it. But what I saw as the ideal when we started this was to have a relationship with a couple families where we had their kids on a regular basis, so they would become familiar with us, and we would know the parents and the kids, and it would be a nice situation. And that's happened quite a bit. But the other side of that is when the agency might call you on a Wednesday or Thursday and say, we have a 5-year-old or something like that. Are you available to take him? So it can be planned out well in advance, or it can be pretty much spontaneous. And in the spontaneous situations, a lot of times they'll just show up at our door on a Friday afternoon or something, and that's our introduction to the family. So it runs the whole gamut, but it's been
But it
very
is our
interesting.
choice
It-
too.
yeah.
We're flexible enough that if we we work with the Bear Foundation, and the caseworkers there, they know us and they have done a home visit, so they know what we can provide and what we can do and how we interact with certain ages and things like that. And so they're familiar with us as a family, to see if it fits the need. But we can, when they call, we can say no. We can say we're busy, or what we've done recently, and we didn't do it much through COVID, but when we started back after COVID, there was a big influx of kids and needy families.
Yep.
And we were doing it every weekend and not planning to, but a need would arise, and sometimes we didn't want to say no. So we did talk about it later and said, I think we better stick to maybe just twice a month, so that we don't get inundated and
That's right.
too overused, maybe, if you want to put it that way. But even still, we do what we can. And if we can, we do. So
That's really helpful. And so for our listeners and our viewers, just to recap some of the things you said. So respite is shorter and it's flexible. So it's often to provide a break for families, either for they have to go away, or they've got a funeral to go to, or a vacation out of country, or they just need a break. They need an emotional break. And you all participating in the kids go to you for a short period of time gives them a recharge, a free weekend, reconnect with their own bio kids if they've got them, or have a date night, or just sleep more, whatever the issue is. But that keeps them in the game. Later on, we're gonna talk about support teams, and a very similar dynamic to support teams and caring communities as it is respite. With in care communities or people who have support teams. If you don't have, one of the things we'll say later is, if you don't have a support team, 50% of foster families end within 1 year. If you do have support, more than 90% continue for 2 years or more. And so respite, I think, has the very similar impact, not just on foster families, but even in kids. Let me just speak to some of the research shows that respite care reduces stress in families, to what I'm saying, risk of abuse and neglect, marital tensions, feeling of depression, and aloneness. And we'll put it in the show notes, a link to a research paper on Adopt US Kids that speaks to this dynamic, that you can learn more about the value of respite. But I think it's very clear that anyone who's caring for kids who have experienced trauma or in transition needs care and needs help and needs a teammate. So yeah, you really touched on why you stepped into this some, but Jack, can I just follow up a little bit on what you said of just your willingness to do this? you and I have talked about how this isn't maybe how you thought you would spend your time, like as a guy, as a retiree. Like, speak to why you chose to do this and not do the things that you thought you would be doing with your time.
It really started with the training. You learn so much about. I was a high school counselor for many years and dealt with some difficult situations, but the training exposes you to things that these kids go through that really I had little or no idea about, and it created a compassion for the whole situation, the foster families, the foster kids, and just upped my emotional thinking quite a bit going through the training and all the videos they show you. And so, well, it just developed a desire to give it a shot. And here we are 5 years later, still shooting. So,
And he's very, very good with all the kids. He's the one I initially had said they'll give you a choice of what age group you're looking at. And I initially said babies and young preschoolers. And he looked at me and he said, well, why wouldn't we do a 10-year-old? And he said, because then it has to be you out in the backyard with them playing ball or going down to the park and stuff like that with them. I prefer the little ones. And so that's really what has kind of happened. And we've had various age groups, and he does get attached to some of these kids that are, needing that father image and attention is what they all just need. They just love the one-on-one attention. And we're able to do that at this point of our life, not being distracted by another job, or we don't have children in the home already. So that's a big part of it. And even when we have little ones, he's my support. He'll do all the cleaning things and the stuff while if I might be dealing with the infants, then he takes care of other things that I don't have to worry about.
normally it's maybe 2, 3, or 4 days that we will have these kids, but the longest we had one was a 9-year-old, and we had him for about 10 days. And he and I really became buddies in that situation. Cutest little guy. And I could tell you story after story about the things that we did together. But as she said, we try to do something a little bit special with them. It's not just put them in front of the TV, but we've taken them to Gettysburg Miniature Horse Farm, Chocolate World, Paulus's Animal Farm there. And we try to do a lot of things with them just to give them a grandparent type experience. So
they like that.
I can imagine that they'd like that. And yeah, I just think that faithfulness and being willing to share your love with them is such a sweet testimony. And you said earlier about the pressure that you feel to say yes, because the need is so great coming out of COVID, but probably before that, even like the pressure to say yes. One of our goals for this podcast is to have more people say yes to alleviate that we'd have more than enough throughout the whole process. There are people waiting to take in kids and be a grandparent or a father or mother figure to these kids, in addition to their foster parents and bio families, of course. Can you just say a little bit about what you've gained, and then framing it that way, like what you've gained and how you've grown personally in this? Because I imagine that there's been fruit in growth in you. And then Nate wants to revisit some of like the what do you do and more of the details of Respite. But yeah, what have you gained and what have you learned about yourself or by God by participating in Respite?
Well, the big thing I've learned from God is, and it always surprises me but never should, is just keep the door open. Who knows what God has put in front of your path? And as I said at the beginning, at age 70, if somebody would have said you're going to be doing this, I would have fought it hook, line, and sinker. So unless you have a real good reason to say no, why say no?
Right. did support group meetings in the past with other foster families so that they get to know who I am. There's a lot of foster families that are hesitant on doing respite or asking for respite from their caseworkers because they don't know that other person. It's like sending your kids to a babysitter that you have no idea about. And that to me would be very frightening. So I go to the support groups and talk with amongst the foster
Recruits.
families. Yeah, yeah.
She goes and recruit. Here we are.
You do.
And we have gotten
I see that.
some families that way. We've also had some families from church because West Shore is has that foster initiative, that there's a lot of foster families here that we can get to know personally too. And so we get like a reference and they say, oh, well, there's Jack and Nancy and they do respite.
I tell people all the time.
Well, that's great, but it would be great to have more people doing respite, even if you're doing it once a month, twice a year, something. Just do it once and see how it fits into your life. It fits into our life. It's nothing that we can't do for a weekend. I don't feel like it's a big sacrifice when we sacrifice a weekend that, otherwise he might be golfing or something like that. But so it's more of his sacrifice, but, and we bring them to church, or most of the time there's no problem with bringing the kids to church. So they love to come and go to Sunday school and, do the activities that are here. So it works.
Well, it's cool that the families that you've done respite for that go to our church, for those kids to see your familiar faces, when they come back on Sunday, is a really cool relationship that hopefully is ongoing. And like you said, not all situations are going to be like that, but at least for the ones where you do get paired up with a family like that, that's a real opportunity for another friendship for a kid, another mentor, just another caring and safe adult in their life that they're constantly seeing and who consistently shows up. And sadly, that's not the norm for these kids. So the power of that is really endless.
Well, I take it seriously too when children are dedicated in our church, and there's that call to the pastor asks the congregation, will you support this family in the raising of their children in a godly manner? I take that very seriously. I'm part of these families and part of these children's, their upbringing. And I feel that if we've been given the resources and the ability to do these things, I think we're called to do that. And it's important. I know it's important because we see their faces. They're not afraid when they come to Miss Nancy and Mr. Jack's house. They're looking forward to it. And that's important. That makes me feel better too, and he sees that too.
Yeah, so the kids are looking forward to it, and I've heard stories from you all about that, and that's so encouraging. And I know some of the kids who have come to your home, and they talk about you affectionately, which is no surprise to me. But to what you said earlier, Nancy, the families that are partnering with you in respite, but they're foster families who are entrusting you with the kids, it's an encouragement to them. And as we talked about earlier, it keeps them in the game. But again, it also relieves, I think, the pressure of feeling like, oh, I'm the only one that's pouring into these kids and I've chosen this. But it's actually we as a community get to come alongside these kids and say, you matter to us because you matter to God. And so we get to serve you. We don't have to serve you. It's like when I go to work, I say to my kids, I get to go to work today. I don't have to go to work. We get to come alongside these kids and these families. We don't have to. In a way we do because God has called us to do something, and this is something that we can do. So I just really appreciate your attitudes and your open-handedness about all of this. I've learned a great deal from both of you. And you're so humble. And there's a lot of things I love about you. And one of the things I don't love is that Jack's a Steelers fan. So not all of us have seen
I may
the
pack
air.
that in.
Yeah.
After
Well,
last
by the
weekend.
time this airs, it might be warranted. You know, this is, you know, we just finished week 4 for those of you that are listening to this and looking at the schedule. They're 1-3 right now, I think, as are my Patriots. So that's fine. But Jack, I just wanted to highlight something and brag about you a bit because I think it resonates with many of our listeners and our viewers. You once said to me something in a conversation. I was asking you about how you do this and why you do this, and you remarked that a lot of people talk about foster care as a young person's game, but you are engaged in this, and you're sprier than me. The activity. In many ways, I know Nancy's laughing, but you should ask my wife. I played golf yesterday and I was so sore. I was crawling around the house. But why I'm noting this is that people who are listening might say, oh, that's for people in their 20s or their 30s. But I would argue, based on your professional experience and your experience raising kids, that you are uniquely equipped by God to navigate uncharted waters. Like each kid who comes to your home, there are certainly things you don't know and you don't feel equipped for, but you have been through a bunch. Would you say that that's true or not true? Because you have experience both in your workplaces and in parenting that uniquely equips you, where some people who go into this have never raised kids before or just early on and they're willing and they might have the time and the energy, but not the experience. Does that resonate with you or not?
Very much so. And I don't know that we've approached in any way the entire spectrum of the situations we'll get into, but as I've shared before, one of the most emotional things with me was we had 2 little boys dropped off in the morning, and there was going to be a hearing that day. And when they were dropped off at 8:00 in the morning, they did not know where they were going to spend that night. And those kind of situations just rip your guts out, and you think, I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. But then the other side of that is there's some pretty solid situations. We had a little girl over the weekend that's probably going to be adopted, and it was fantastic. It was very secure. We've had her before, and she loves us. So again, from getting somebody in the morning to not knowing to another situation where there's probably going to be an adoption. I don't know if we've seen the tip of the iceberg yet, but we're still there.
Yeah, it's pretty much it is a little bit of a, I don't want to say an emotional roller coaster, but it's different for each experience.
Yeah.
And if there's anything negative or something that goes on, there's always many more positives to the experience than anything else. And we have learned a lot about the need for fostering, the need for respite in families' lives, and it's like our eyes are opened, and it's really out there. I appreciate everything that you do in order to inform just everyday people that there's something they can be doing, even if it's not doing the actual respite work, but doing something else for foster families in order to support them and keep them going, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of strain and emotional upheaval in their own lives, and whatever we can do to alleviate some of that or help them in any way, I just think it's not that hard.
You talk about being humble, Ryan. The foster families put us on a pedestal like we're their heroes. Now, that's nice, but they are the real heroes, these people that have the kids full time and that. But there's a great deal of respect and mutual appreciation when they drop a foster child off or pick them up. They're very gracious.
And every hero needs a sidekick, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
what you guys are able to
Yeah.
do. You're able to come
Yes.
alongside them and
Well
give
put.
them
Yeah.
wisdom, give them
Right.
just proximity to the kids even.
Right.
And when they're not
Right.
there,
Yeah.
there are things in your own experience that you can
Yep.
share. There are
Yeah.
ways that you can just be there for them, not
Mhm.
necessarily just with wisdom, but just
Mhm.
being there, and
Yeah.
they can vent to you. They're just like an ongoing relationship with that sidekick
Yeah.
hero thing.
Yeah.
I think that could work out really perfectly.
Yeah, it does. It does work, and you can make your own parameters, especially with respite. I don't get down on the floor with the kids anymore. I just can't. My knees can't do it. So that I have my own limitations too, even though I like the little ones. But it's kind of like with grandparenting. You can give them back at the end of the weekend, or you don't have to do it on weekends. There's sometimes the needs a little bit. It might be after school, like an after school care or something that somebody needs. We can't particularly do that, but the needs are different.
The needs are different, and I really resonate with the underlining point that you all are making as it pertains to the relief that you all provide, and the relief that foster parents even provide to these kids by giving them a stable home. But one of the things I've seen a lot as it pertains to respite and foster care is actually the consternation and conflict in the hearts of people who do what you do, that you do feel this pressure to keep doing it because the need is so great in ways that you would like others to do it. So you can say no when you should say no. And that's really hard. And one of the things that I have seen over and over again is I think we're asking the wrong question. Too often, those of us not engaged in the day-to-day work of foster care are saying, they're asking questions like, why are you bringing trauma into your home? Like, how could you do that? Instead of, these kids are in trauma, what can we do? Like, whether I bring them into the home or not, I think is a fair question. But we also have to sit with a first question of, these kids are in trauma. What does God require of me? What does God want me to do? And if we're obedient to the Lord, he will meet us where we're at, and he will grow us where we need to grow. And the sanctification requires sacrifice, right? And redemption requires sacrifice. And I think that a lot of foster families and a lot of respite families like yourselves reject the notion of hero and sidekick to heroes, in large part because there's this deep feeling that grows in you over time of like, do we not see that these kids have a need? I'm just doing what the Father has required of me. And it would be less heroic if it would become more common. And the kids are going somewhere. And just that little example you gave, I'm going to be thinking about that a while, Jack, of the two kids who came to you and not knowing where they're going to sleep. Earlier in this episode, we heard from a caseworker who was sharing with us about the increasing number of kids who are having to sleep at agencies because there's nowhere for those kids to go. So they've just been removed from their homes, and it's a really traumatic place. And now they have to go stay in a temporary bed with an adult that they don't know in an office building because there's no one available to take in these kids. I'm not saying that to encourage you to do more than you are. I am saying that for our listeners and even for my family, to say the reality is these kids are in trauma and transition. What does the Lord require of us? And then to do that, it will, just like the kids' experiences will be different, our experience and how we step into this crisis will be different. And that's good and of the Lord, because if we're all doing that, all doing the same thing, we wouldn't cover the spectrum. But just pausing as we're listening to Jack and Nancy and asking, what does the Lord require of me? Has been a helpful question. And then I get to obey God because I get to experience and draw closer to the heart of God when I do things that he's asking me to do. As you think about all that we've covered and things that we haven't covered, is there anything you'd like to say that we didn't get to, or anything, Nate, that we didn't ask that you wanted to ask as a follow-up from our conversation with them before?
No, just would be curious if you guys have any final words of encouragement or
One thing that I don't think we knew ahead of time was now we work with the Bear Foundation, but there's other agencies and things to go through. Um, Going through a type of training where some of them is video training and it's not it's there's no experience training. I mean, they don't practice. You don't practice doing things like that, but to have the screening process that the agencies go through, it's those things are important because it assures us that the caseworkers, when they recommend a family or they're looking at a need that they have, they know who we are and what we have at our home, and that we have um, a safe and secure home that somebody can go to. It's not like just volunteering and saying, oh, yes, I'll babysit for those children. The foster families need to know that where they're sending their foster kids, even if they're fostering temporarily, not necessarily fostering to adopt, but they need to know that they're letting somebody else know that is aware of all the ramifications, or some of the ramifications, and that it's a safe and it's a secure place. And I think it's important for the foster families to know that. So it's important for us or anybody thinking of doing respite, that they go through the steps that are required in order to be certified. And we have a recertification every year. So we have to redo those things every year. It gets easier too. So that would be one thing. You got anything more to add?
No, that's good.
Other than go Steelers,
Yeah, right.
So Nate, what are your takeaways besides our teams in football are not very good?
Hey, mine had a good weekend for the first time all year. So
Well,
I'm a Giants fan.
Oh, gee.
So we had a big win. But yeah, I think my takeaways, I could have many, but I think the ones that stuck out to me the most from both our pre-production conversation and then this conversation is if you don't have a reason to say no, don't say no. I think that's very simple but very profound in that we often make up excuses, or it's very easy to make up things if we're not fully in on something.
Yeah.
And so if we don't have a reason to say no, then we should say yes.
Yeah.
And especially if you have the resources, the training, all those things. And even if you don't, you can get those things to be able to provide this really meaningful intervention. And then the other one was just do it once, just try it. You guys had said that. And, it's hard to think about, I don't know how many times a year I could do this. I don't know how much we could handle in a month.
Yeah.
Well, try it. And once you try it, see what that's like and see, once you get to know those kids, you get to be proximate to them and their families. What can you do? And whatever you have to offer is amazing. And we want to welcome whatever you have to bring to the table. Yeah. Anything for you, Ryan? I mean, not anything. I'm sure you have plenty, but
Lord knows I can speak. Lord knows I can speak. I think two things for me. One is just a profound thing. One of you said, I forget who, so we'll give it to Nancy. Keep doors open. Just keep your doors open. And I think that's a good posture for respite, but a good posture to this whole endeavor of what we're thinking about. Just what does God have for you? And opening your doors to your neighbors, your friends, your community. And it's amazing that when we pray for divine appointments, when we pray for God to use us and use our home as a blessing to others, he will do that every time. So it's hard to get to respite, or it's hard to step into foster care if our heart's disposition is closed. So just to be open to be used by God, to love God and love our neighbors. And the second thing that I wanted to highlight is something that you didn't say, but I've just observed through this conversation and my years of knowing you now, is that it's something you can do together. That one of my fears is that my wife and I would grow in Christ together and not apart. So my fear is that like we would get busy with doing things that are separate, and we do those things, and those are good for us to do. But these are things that you need to do and you can do together. Is a beautiful thing. And I love the way you all interact with this but it's an equally full participation thing that might have been inspired by one but shared by both, and that's a great example for us. So thank you both.
Ryan, I don't know if this is appropriate or not.
Yeah, go ahead.
We would talk to anybody that's remotely considering respite. We would share our experiences and the hesitation initially and where we are right now. So if this tweaks anybody, especially people in their 70s, we'd be more than happy to talk to them.
That's great. Yeah, right in the possibleandlikely.com, there's a way that you can contact us. And so if you want to connect to learn more about respite, or maybe even connect with Jack and Nancy, we'd be happy to help facilitate that. But just know that we're grateful for your time, Jack and Nancy, with us today, but really your faithfulness to God. And we know that God will continue to do a good work in ways that you might not get to see the fruits of your labor, right? That's parenting, that's teaching. The kids that you've invested in over the years and drop truth or a word or a guiding correction, you don't know always the fruits of that labor. But I think it's such a good example of doing things pleasing to the Lord and then trusting the Lord will use our obedience to his glory, come what may. And so just thank you. And to our viewers and our listeners, today we've been talking about during foster care. And next we're going to look at after. What happens as kids age out? We're going to explore adoption. So continue the journey with us. And again, we're not trying to frame you into one particular thing or not, right? Our job is to give you exposure to what's reality. This is happening. As I was just saying earlier, the question isn't why should we bring trauma into our home or how will we ever make it? Those are good questions, but questions to bring to the Lord. He has clearly invited us to ask, see these kids that I love, and ask, what do you require of me, Lord? Like the Good Samaritan story. We can't go around. We can't ignore. We see them. We know them now. And what can we do? Lord, what do you want me to do? And I promise you, I give you my full assurance with every fiber of my being. I have found time and time again, stepping into hard things that the Lord has asked me to do is the most freeing, joy-filled thing, even in the midst of challenge, because I know that I am in proximity to the King of Kings, the maker of the heavens and the earth, the God who loved me so much to create me and give me life for the purpose of glorifying him here on earth so that all might see and know of the glory of God. So just consider, what does the Lord require of you? Before, during, and after. And as we keep saying throughout this podcast, there's a lot of challenges in this world that have no earthly solution. Our region's foster care crisis should not be one of them. And there's things that we can do. And what is your thing? Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Thank you.